All right. Good morning, everybody. How are you today? Hope you're doing well. Good morning. Happy Thursday. Pat is with us. So nice to have you here. I'm going to give a little talk this morning, inspired by some of our discussion yesterday. So we were having a chat yesterday. I was talking a little about processed food and how it's definitely been a big component that has been driving our collective experience with obesity. Obesity, just for reference, is a word I don't really like. I don't like to say it. I don't like it. People have different opinions on it, kind of medicalizing the situation with weight that we're experiencing. But it is, the medical word. It's what's in the literature. And so we'll use it, but we'll be thoughtful. And if you find it to be a frustrating word, just realize, okay, you're not alone with that one. So the hidden history of obesity. I think we have a framing in our modern experience. Okay, we talk about the obesity epidemic, and it's something that has, burst on the scene. It's a new phenomenon. And I thought, let's dive in and try to get a really deep understanding of what's going on. So that was triggered by a discussion when I was bringing it up for saying, okay, well, processed food, it wasn't Ben Franklin overweight, didn't he have obesity? And so I say, well, hey, that's a good point. Let's have a dialogue. Okay, it's not like obesity has never existed in any other era. You say, well, are we really unique in what we're dealing with? If we want to solve this problem, maybe we aren't going to solve it in the whole society, but we want to solve it for ourselves. We want to say, we're sitting here, I think 70 days, 70 opportunities left as we're recording this in 2025, stepping toward better health. And whenever you're watching, we've got opportunities to be on a path. And so what does it mean? What does that path exactly look like? And what has it looked like for other people? So Ben Franklin, at age 84, which is in something like 1790, he was 5'9", 200 pounds, BMI 29.5. Approximately. I was reading some articles on this. How accurate was it? I don't know. But we're getting in the ballpark. So most of his life, as you look through his writings, he considered himself overweight, and we'll look at actually some of his writings. I think it's very interesting. Especially in the cultural context, okay? So one passage I was reading assessed Franklin gained weight significantly as he aged. He was known to enjoy rich foods and had a sedentary lifestyle. So, 1790, here's someone who is kind of grappling with the same sort of, issues that we are today. And also, point out, no industrialized agriculture really at that point. So that's, something. But, rich foods available. There's sugar and pastries and all kinds of stuff like this is happening. All right, so here's some writing of Franklin as we try to put it in context. Dialogue between Franklin and the gout. So gout is, in many cases, downstream of weight issues. And Franklin struggled with gout and kidney stones kind of famously throughout his life. And so he wrote this dialogue between himself, writing as himself, and then metaphorical gout as like this physician that he's talking with. Oh, what have I done to merit this cruel suffering? I don't know if you're familiar. Gout's so painful. And gout is saying, oh, many things. You ate and drank too freely, too much indulged those legs of yours in their indolence. You reproach me like a glutton and a tippler. But I very well know that the quantity of meat and drink proper for a man who takes a reasonable degree of exercise. Madam, gout, you know my sedentary state. In life, as a sedentary one, your amusements, your recreation at least, should be active. You ought to walk or ride, yet you eat an inordinate breakfast, 4 dishes of tea with cream, and 1 or 2 buttered toasts with slices of hung beef, which I fancy are not things the most easily digested. Not good for gout either. Immediately afterwards, you sit down to write at your desk, or you converse with persons who apply in your business, and thus time passes till 1 without any kind of bodily exercise. But your inseparable love of ease. Oh, Franklin says, for heaven's sake, leave me. I promise faithfully, I'll never play chess, but I will take exercise daily and live temperately. All right, so it's interesting to see, like, he's like in significant pain, from gout, and he's resolving, okay, I'm gonna do better. In a different excerpt, Poor Richard's Almanac, he wrote, 1734, very early. Be temperate in wine and eating, in girls and sloth, or gout will seize you and plague you both. So it's just interesting, I think, to hear from him. So we can have this idea, all right, here's someone struggling with the same sort of things that we are. And, what is that like in a historical context? So when we are looking at obesity, we're often looking at a chart, like this. I can line that up exactly. This chart is showing rates of obesity top line in the U.S. From 1990 through 2022-ish. And we see that, line going up. The other lines here, we got the UK and Australia, Brazil, and then down here, we got India and Nigeria. And so, we look at this line, and this is kind of our modern context. This is what we say, okay, obesity rates doubled since 1990 approximately. And so that's giving kind of a context to what's going on. Here is where I want to start diving in historically to the context. This graph, this chart, is a recreation, kind of a collection of 3 different studies that are historical surveys. This one, from 1890, looking at rates of obesity prevalence in the U.S., and then another one, 1920s, and then we start the modern data collection in the 60s, and then we are typically picking up the graph here. So when we're looking at this previous graph, so this whole experience of our modern context is just this last edge of this experience here. And so when we don't want to miss the forest for the trees. So as we pull back on this chart, we look, okay, this experience extends much deeper into the past than we typically appreciate. And isn't it interesting that if we go back to this chart, you think about the social context that is happening, here, and then, look at the social context in India and Nigeria, for example. You can imagine taking these charts and these lines and grabbing them and then bringing them over here and extending our chart out. And you can picture this one long, huge chart spanning hundreds of years. And so you can see that actually the roots of this process, individuals like Franklin, dealing with it, writing about the same sorts of things that we are experiencing. And then globally, everybody kind of experiencing this basically after the Industrial Revolution. So here's an interesting paper that I found to try to dive into the weeds on it, the detail. This study that these 2 kind of statisticians did, evolution of BMI values of U.S. adults, 1882 to 1986. So now we're really getting into the, the deep history, and they're using as many data sources as they can to kind of derive the best curves off of this. Here I give you some excerpts from their study. It seems we're but helpless bystanders, they say, to the obesity pandemic sweeping the globe. But I say no, not us here. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to learn about all these things deeply so that actually we can push our way forward. And don't just, be helpless to it. More than a third of U.S. adults, this was written in 2010, more than a third of U.S. adults, about 70 million persons, struggling with obesity. Yet, before we can come up with appropriate measures to counter this trend, we need to know more about its development. That's what's so interesting, I think, about these charts, to get into the deep history of it. The official view propagated by the CDC is that the U.S. epidemic appeared rather suddenly in the 80s. That's what I'm showing you with these charts, that we're kind of zoomed in. We believe this view is misleading after their research. There is ample historical evidence that the roots of the obesity pandemic reach much further back in time than is commonly asserted. For the 19th century, we have samples from West Point revealing that by today's standards, BMI values were amazingly low, about 90% of cadets, below today's median reference value. These data indicate there is very little change in weight in the 19th century. Another sample from the Military Academy indicates a true surge in BMI values took place among those born after World War I. So I'll show you this data. It's showing, however, half the increase took place among those born before World War II. Yeah, so it's easier to see it. So these are some of the data series that they were putting together to create some of the graphs that I'll show you. So these BMI values of 18-year-old men in the U.S., look, this is going all the way back, 1850. Average BMI like 19. And so then there are these two jumps, 1920 and then 1980, which is really interesting to see as we kind of get back. And then this data mirrors some of these other curves and reconstructions that I showed already. Here's some of the data from this series that they put together. The way you interpret this is showing BMI over time going back to 1880 by decile. So the lowest line is the lowest 10% of the population, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90th percentile of the population at the top. So as you head back to 1880, you see it's only the very top 10% is making it into the overweight category, and basically no obesity, what it is showing across the entire population. And so then we head through time, we see, across all deciles, weight increasing over the last, century and a half. But it started way back here. And then, of course, the higher deciles experiencing a greater magnitude effect. The lower chart, what it's showing you is the rate of change, which I think is also very interesting. You see the stability in weight coming into the turn of the century around 1900, and then things taking off through roaring 20s, and then Great Depression, right? So what we're seeing here is the rate of change, the rate of increase, basically. Everything above this line, weight is increasing at a faster rate. So by the end of the Great Depression, before the start of World War I, people almost got back to not increasing. That's what we see in this relative flat period here, but still always slightly trending up. And then World War II and afterward, things really start accelerating. So I think it's very interesting to see when you look at a line like this, you look at 1980 on a chart, we're just part of one big fluid process that has been, developing for hundreds of years. Here's their conclusions. Lifestyle changes of the 20th century affected the groups under study differently. Identifying the deep causes of the long-running trends outside the scope of the study, but we'll give it a shot to do some thinking about it. The creeping nature of the epidemic and its persistence suggests the roots are embedded deep in the social fabric and are nourished by a network of disparate, slowly changing sources as the 20th century population responded to a vast array of irresistible and impersonal socioeconomic and technical forces. Yeah, this is where I want to go so much that I've tried to say, especially in that talk, is obesity a disease, right? Is to pull back and look at the big picture. We make these things so personal. And of course, we all have a personal experience with these things that are happening. But the part of saying, no, it's not a disease, people like to say it's a disease so that they can say, well, we have a cure for it. We have a medication. We have things. Okay. And then we don't have to stigmatize it. But the thing to me that's really destigmatizing, tell me if you agree, is just to pull back and say, this isn't really a personal situation. Like, this is a societal thing that has been, developing for hundreds of years. Wild. The most obviously persistent changes in the 20th century, major labor-saving technology, industrial processing of food, the spread of fast food. I thought this was very interesting. I didn't know. White Castle, the first drive-in restaurant, founded 1921. I would not have guessed 1921. If I was on a trivia show, I would have said McDonald's first, and that came in the late 40s. I would have guessed late 50s, but very interesting. KFC, 1952. Burger King, 1954. Pizza Hut, 1958. Taco Bell, 1962, and Subway, 1962. So it's very interesting. Talk about roots going deep. Like, I didn't realize that all these franchises have been with us for so long. The associated culture of consumption. I talk a lot here about consumption culture. This is just like a huge thing that has come upon us, in human society. The rise of an automobile-based way of life. Yeah, this is a relatively new way in the broad sweep of history of living and existing. Introduction of radio and television. Participation of women in the workforce. Many pros and cons to it. The IT revolution. These elements taken together virtually defined American society in the 20th century. And then that's the social context that has driven so much of this change. We see the correlation in the data. They're saying radio, television, automobiles, all these things. The fact that the obesity epidemic started earlier than hitherto thought also implies that the current weight and BMI standards set by the CDC are inaccurate. They're not ideal for gauging the true extent of the epidemic, especially among children and youth. Reference charts are supposed to reflect what is normal within the society. And in this case, in this case, they do not do so. Insofar as they incorporate BMI values obtained at a time when the transition was already more widespread than in historical times. That's what I'm showing you on this chart. So much of the data that is informing our decision, because we're short-lived creatures, we look over a generation or two and we say, oh my gosh, like we go back generations. It was so long ago, but not really. And when we realize the deep history of what has been happening in society, we realize like our whole baseline has been skewed, and the measures they're saying that we use even are skewed because we haven't looked at the deep history of what is happening. This was an arbitrary choice, they say. The current standards are misleading as they suggest that weights obtained in the midst of the pandemic, they're even saying like the 60s, is where we're setting so many of these baselines. Like we take that as the baseline, and I've done that a lot. And right, if we could hit a button and just go back to the 60s, we say we solve half the problem, but it's like we're halfway there. Shouldn't our baseline be set before this problem started? And maybe the disturbing part is that this has its roots really in the Industrial Revolution, really, and we've just been on a course ever since it, which is the point in human history where we basically started, completely divorcing ourselves from natural cycles in the natural world, and we're building, a machine culture and connecting ourselves to that, and that's where we start deviating from the systems that keep our metabolism in a healthy balance. First time I've thought of that, I think, to go that far back to see the roots of it. The consequences of this: many overweight and obese children and youth are misled into believing that their weight is normal when it's not. I think we have a lot of that going on. The U.S. should strive to adopt standards such as those in the Netherlands, where policymakers are less content to stand by and watch an obesity epidemic spread unabated. So I read that and I said, the logical conclusion is like, well, what are these, incredible Netherlands guidelines, and what are they doing? I couldn't find them. I looked. I could not see what they are doing differently in the Netherlands, at least in 2010 when they published this. So we head back to Ben Franklin, right, where we started. Okay, so obesity has been with us for a long time, but when we put it in context, we see it's not like it is today. As we head back on the best historical data that I can find, the obesity rate in 1790, when Ben Franklin's BMI was 29.5, 1% or less probably. 1-2%. It's hard to be very precise about it, but we're talking about something very, very small. We're 45x where we were back at that point, which is just wild to think about it. And then that rate, 1790, we're already, a century in or so on this Industrial Revolution. And that rate is probably like 10x what it was a couple hundred years before that. And so obesity always been present. Like I was saying yesterday, you can go back and see Roman murals and all this sort of stuff and paintings of people dealing with this issue. But it is so rare historically, especially compared to our modern context, is just to give us this perspective and especially to give us a perspective on what is normal. These are just my little thoughts on it. A simple fasting, this is like notes to myself, right? Simple fasting is normal. It doesn't feel normal, I think, to even myself, a lot of people in society today, because it's so different, right? To talk about fasting in the middle of a consumption culture feels abnormal. It's like, this is not what most people are doing. But like, you're here on this channel. I'm here hanging out. My observation over the course of, my clinical practice for many years is like, hey, you give the human body some space. Fasting is deep physiology in the body. Body is trying to store energy for us. We can unravel this situation. We can push back. We're not helpless, like the authors of this study said. Definitely things we can do. Getting the processed food out is a huge component. Moving our bodies in healthy ways, incredible opportunity to burn energy in the body. Fasting space, an incredible opportunity to move forward. That is normal. It is the modern health experience that we're having that is not normal. If we took, we got our chart showing all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, we have in our mind, that is even just one tiny slice of the millennia of human history that we've had on this planet that was basically, a flat line on the bottom of that chart for tens of thousands of years or however long. So we zoom out, we don't miss the forest for the trees, and we say, okay, if we're existing here in this very atypical space, right? So it seems normal because we're sitting in the middle of it, and these things happen on a time scale that is bigger than our life, so it's very hard to appreciate, and the change is happening slowly, and so all these things get normalized. So I hope it's helpful to kind of see some of this data, take a look, and kind of zoom out and think, so what does it mean, for our life, this hidden history of obesity, the stuff we never think about or appreciate. The hidden history is mainly its absence, just to show us this modern context, not normal. And so if we want to change, right, we want to take as much responsibility for it as we can. You say, well, we have to get out of this modern mindset. We have to stop thinking that these practices that we have are normal, because they're not healthy. They're not creating the environment that is leading to, flourishing and the very best metabolic health that we can have, which is, of course, what I want for people, what we should want. Okay, I want to give you a couple other graphs that I thought were really interesting. So I said we dive deep, like that one article said, like, why is this really happening is not something that we can just cover in this paper. So I want to give you my thoughts about it. When I started putting together the graphs for the talk, this is the chart that came to my mind. And I just think this is fascinating to think about. This chart from Our World in Data, which is a fascinating website. You can get amazing data and visualizations on so many different things. This is global primary energy consumption by source. And so when I think about, what are we trying to do in a fasting space? We're trying to give the body space to use energy, burn down excess. Okay, is an energy balance problem? Calories, a unit of energy. And one of the concepts that I've seen so much in the talks we've done, the thinking that we've done, okay, we take away so much of the personal, the intensity, and realize that in so many ways, our bodies, our experiences, they're mirroring the society. So this chart, the bottom layer is wood, okay? If we're heading back here, look, it's the same time. Here's 1870. So just like where we started our obesity graph, think about the energy consumption over time and the mirroring of the energy imbalance in society and the energy imbalance in the body. 1870, we're basically 100% wood, 97% and a little bit of coal, and we start coal mining. And then by the turn of the century, we're approaching 50-50 wood and coal. And then we head through the early 20th century. We're ramping up coal. We start hitting the oil wells. And this is when things really started ramping up. Look, we're adding on the oil, and then we start accessing natural gas, and then we start layering everything on top. Everything else are these little slivers on top of our total energy consumption. Nuclear power, wind, hydro, solar, other biofuels. And so if we look at these graphs, here's the original composite graph that I was showing you, right? The obesity trends, you say correlation is not causation. I totally get that. But the counter to that is you have to have correlation for causation to be present. If there's no correlation, like obviously there's nothing to cause. And so this is a fascinating correlation and something that I think is worthy of an incredible amount of thinking, actually, is just how our human body is mirroring this industrial society. The graph of the hidden history, right? The deep history of obesity, the deviation started in the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is the driver of the primary energy consumption. And we've created a situation in which ever increasing amounts of people in our society just mirroring the industrial process of society. And so as I was reflecting about this today, over the day yesterday, over the day today, say, well, what do you do about that? Like, what do you think about that? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and perspectives being exposed to that information. From my perspective, it's just like a call to be super thoughtful, to think like, okay, we have the ability, like within our body, to mirror our environment. What is the environment that we're in? Yesterday we were talking about this association that happens in the brain. We're primed with information, experiences, and then this fast thinking part of the brain is just loading in thoughts, informations, feelings, beliefs based on our experience to try to give us the best opportunity to kind of navigate through this existence, this world that we're in. How do we move forward in the most thoughtful way in the context of this energy experience in a consumption culture? Consumption culture is having geometrically increasing energy usage, is mirroring the geometric increase of the problems that we're having, maintaining the internal energy balance. So my suggestion, my thought, the best ideas that I have, create spaces where we can thoughtfully reflect on that, push back and say, hey, you know what? I want to stop like in the body mirroring this sort of aspect of things. Most things in nature, the industrial process that we see, the geometrically increasing energy use, is not a natural cycle. Natural cycles in Earth go like this, right? Things rise and fall, they come back into balance. So we realize this, say, I am going to make a conscious effort, use this priming that we talked about yesterday to kind of load in the new operating system and say, I want to mirror my body, right? My experience with a weight issue, more on a natural cycle, less on this consumption culture, and more on creating a culture for myself, fasting culture, where we use the natural health processes to bring things back into balance. We want everything back into balance in the body. As I think about it in the big picture, when enough of us kind of bringing everything, both in our mental health, our physical body, back into balance, that's probably the process ultimately that would radiate back out into the world and help with so many of the issues that we have. Pat says, considering this trend is concerning as we rapidly move from industrial to technology-based. Yeah, I've just been thinking about this so much. I was reading about everything that is happening, these days with AI. Okay, everybody's AI crazy. Everybody looking to AI. The thing that is so interesting to me is how much power this stuff consumes. And, as I've been looking at these charts, these geometrically increasing things. Okay, the industrial culture that we've had is like the base that all the technology is sitting on. And as like everybody's pouring hundreds of billions and even trillions of dollars into transitioning us into this tech economy, the thing that doesn't change is the power consumption of it. And I don't see how that equation gets balanced. I mean, already I was reading an article across the East Coast of the US where all these data centers are going in, people's power bills like tripling because data centers coming in, sucking up all the power that should be going just to people. And it feels to me like we're reaching a critical inflection point. And so if we're reaching an inflection point societally with this power, technology, industry, all these things, maybe we are reaching an inflection point just physically, since the body, our collective bodies kind of mirror this situation. It's like, which way do we want to go? This is kind of how I'm feeling. Is this the direction? Are all these processes making the experience of being a human being healthier and happier? what actually are the things that bring health, wholeness, meaning, value, and purpose to life? And are we actually pursuing those things? Or do these graphs suggest that actually, as we look to industry and technology to basically give us progress, like, is it actually just pulling us, like really in a very physically tangible way, in a place that is not actually healthy, like, or that we don't actually choose it? Yeah, power rates just skyrocketing for many people is just going to be, because nobody knows how to stop it. I was listening to an article about it the other day. Like, this train doesn't stop, is what it was saying. Like, we are locked in, and I don't know, gonna run the thing red hot until it breaks, I guess. I don't know. Or we live in a finite world. This is the thing. I look at these graphs, things that are geometrically increasing power consumption. Someone says, like, okay, what if we develop a nuclear fusion? Can we, it's going to be another layer on top of this. I don't know. Can you geometrically increase energy consumption in a finite planet? I don't see how you can do it without breaking a lot of stuff. And one of the things that, is breaking collectively is our health experience. And so that's the mirror as I see these things. We're driving all of it to this inflection point where we just can't go on like this. That's how I feel. We cannot go on like this. And it's very, very interesting. So I'm going to do a lot of thinking on that today. Encourage everybody, do some thinking on it. Share your thoughts on this big picture situation, the deep history of, yes, health, yes, energy, the big picture, human history, industrial revolution through the present. I mean, what a broad sweep of time. Still just a tiny moment when we really zoom back and look at history, and we realize, okay, for the vast majority of human history, people living in a way that did not have the struggles that we are having, okay? And how can we zoom out about this situation that is happening? How can we live differently, okay? Fasting could be one component of it, to say, hey, I'm going to say no. I'm going to separate myself from this to the extent that I can and try to set a little different course. And I think that would be a very healthy and wise thing to do. And I will do my best on this channel to help you do it in as calm, gentle, thoughtful, practical way as possible. 70 opportunities to practice it yet in 2025. And enjoying stepping along the way with you. I will be back to wrap up the week tomorrow. Have a great day. See ya.